Efren Saldivar was born on September the 30th, 1969 in Brownsville, Texas. His parents Alfredo and Isaura had relocated from Mexico specifically so their children would be born as US citizens. They soon moved to Los Angeles, California, with Alfredo becoming a handyman and Isaura a seamstress. Efren was quite an extroverted child and did well in school, though he idolised high school gangs. He also struggled to fit in as he was overweight and got picked on as a result of it. His first job as a teenager was in a supermarket, but he couldn't help himself from stealing, beginning his life of crime. This is when his grades began to suffer, so much so he failed to graduate from high school. In 1988, Efren was now 19 years old when he met a friend who studied at the College of Medical and Dental Careers in North Hollywood, California. He decided to follow in their footsteps, passing a high school equivalency test before enrolling at the college himself. After a year of studies, he earned his certificate, and that same year landed a job as a respiratory therapist at the Glendale Adventist Medical Center. Efren was well liked by his colleagues at first. He was described as being very competent at the job and incredibly reliable, though behind closed doors he was suffering from depression and took Zoloft to try to help, but he soon came off the meds. It was in this clinic Efren Saldivar began his rampage. At some point during his early stages in the job, a woman had terminal cancer and was on her deathbed. Her family had said their final goodbyes before leaving. Efren approached the patient and realised that she was actually still breathing. Nobody had unplugged her life support machine as planned. He felt so sorry for her that he decided to connect 2 tubes which cut off her oxygen and suffocated the patient. He claimed he felt so sorry for her, he just wanted to end her pain. He always worked the night shift when hardly any other staff were around. Furthermore, colleagues didn't really question things. They could walk in and out of patients' rooms unannounced and wouldn't question other therapists injecting their patients, trusting all of them entirely. But it was this trust that would become their downfall. Over the years, Efren would inject patients with a paralytic drug, which would lead to a cardiac arrest. He would use Pavulon, a muscle relaxant, which is used to calm patients before putting them on a respirator. But Efren would do this without the latter, so instead of being resuscitated, they would just simply die. He would always choose very specific patients who were unconscious and already close to death, so it wouldn't seem out of the ordinary for them to suddenly pass away. There would be no suspicion on the increase in deaths or them receiving any of these particular doses. He would also specifically choose patients who had a do-not-resuscitate order in their file. On December the 27th, 1996, 75-year-old Salbi Asatrian was admitted to the hospital, but mysteriously died just 3 days later. That very same day, 77-year-old Eleonora Schlegel was admitted and died 3 days on. On January the 2nd, 1997, 82-year-old Jose Alfaro was admitted but died 2 days later. 87-year-old Luina Shidlowski joined the clinic on January the 20th, but died 48 hours afterwards. On February the 26th, 1997, 65-year-old Jean Coyle was in the hospital when she pressed her button for assistance, and Efren responded. Jean didn't remember anything else, as she completely blacked out. She woke up later on having no idea what had happened, but she didn't question it. She wouldn't realise until years later what actually took place, and how lucky she was to have escaped with her life. On August the 6th, 1997, 87-year-old Balbino Castro arrived at the clinic, but died 9 days later. And on August the 18th, 84-year-old Myrtle Brower was admitted, and died 10 days afterwards. It was a gradual thing. I did it without thinking. I don't know if you ever shoplifted a piece of gum or something. You don't plan it. After that moment, you don't think about it for the rest of the day, or ever. These 6 patients are the only confirmed victims of Efren Saldivar, but it's likely his body count is far higher, but suspicion was beginning to rise. An unknown colleague caught him injecting something into the IV of one of his patients. However, the hospital staff didn't notice any rise in deaths during Efren's shifts, and the colleague who reported him had had a long grudge with Saldivar in the past, so his report went ignored. Months later, some colleagues tried to pull a prank by hiding someone else's clothes inside Efren's locker. However, once they pried his locker open, they discovered a stash of drugs, including morphine, succinylcholine chloride, and Pavulon, which respiratory therapists weren't allowed access to. However, since the last time Efren was reported went ignored, and considering the fact that these colleagues had made the discovery by breaking into his locker, they were too scared to report it, as they would actually get in trouble and they wouldn't be believed. However, they may have unintentionally saved lives, as Efren later admitted after this discovery he panicked and stopped injecting patients. On March 3rd, 1998, the hospital received an anonymous tip, later being revealed to have been from a man named Grant Brossus. He claimed that Efren Saldivar was helping to kill patients faster, and Grant tried to blackmail the hospital for $50,000, or else he'll report them to the police. However, the hospital actually decided to call the police themselves in regards to this information, but it didn't help that Grant himself had a criminal record of drug dealing and auto theft. Grant claimed that he was fed this information from a girlfriend of his called Ursula Anderson, who also worked at the clinic. However, once confronted, Ursula denied this and claimed that Grant had made the entire thing up. Ursula had often worked night shifts along with Efren Saldivar, and it's believed that this may have been a love triangle, and that Grant was trying to get revenge by reporting him. Ursula did admit that she often saw Efren wielding a syringe, but she never questioned it and just assumed that he was doing his job. Hundreds of patients' families were questioned, hoping to gain a lead, but absolutely none of them were ever suspicious of Efren Saldivar, and they had no idea whatsoever that their loved one was ever in any danger under his care. However, some of his colleagues did notice that they would discuss which patients may be close to death, and then they would mysteriously die later that same day, but they never reported it, though some of the victims' families even commended his actions, claiming that he truly was ending their pain and was doing the patients a favour. Efren's home was searched, but absolutely no drugs were found. Once he was questioned directly, he immediately confessed, but kept changing his story. Initially, he claimed he had only done this to a couple of patients. Then he increased the number to around 40. Then it grew to around 60 before he lost count. And now it's believed it could have been up to 200 people during his 9 years at the clinic. He called himself an angel of death, claiming that it angered him to see patients being kept alive despite their pain and misery, while he failed to save them. He claimed he did it to end their misery, though he also admitted that sometimes the hospital would be so busy he would kill the patients to ease the workload. On March the 13th, he was fired from the hospital and his respiratory therapist license revoked. However, on March the 25th, it went to the press, and now, suddenly, Efren denied everything. He claimed he was mentally ill and was coerced into confessing, blaming his colleagues for lying and planting the evidence inside his locker, as they just didn't like him. But he also admitted that he was severely depressed and suicidal, and only confessed so he could die. I wanted the system to do to me what I couldn't do. I was looking to die. I wanted to die, but I didn't have the courage. I figured, one death isn't going to be enough for the death penalty, so I said 2. And then I started to cry because I was ending my life. However, shockingly, despite his initial confession, he still couldn't be charged. Even if he had maintained his admittance, the police still required evidence, so he was allowed to walk free, while they now had to exhume the remains of hundreds of patients. Investigators had to look into every single patient that died while Efren Saldivar was on shift. They then had to be exhumed and checked if they contained any of the drugs in question, which was a near impossible task years afterwards, especially considering the fact that most of the patients had been cremated. While the investigation was ongoing, Efren dyed his hair red and moved into an apartment with some other respiratory therapists. He got a job at a budget rent-a-car cleaning vehicles in the day and then delivering pizzas in the evening. He managed to hold these jobs for 8 months before becoming a customer service agent with a telephone dating service called Telechat, working the night shift. Efren was loved by his colleagues, who claimed he would often fix their computers for them if needed. A pregnant colleague once needed a lift home, so he waited for 2 hours for her to drive her back safely. Another won a TV, and Efren happily took it to her home for her. He even began dating one of the colleagues and discussed having children with them. It wasn't until the summer of 1999 when he celebrated his 30th birthday, and he confessed to his boss about his past before quitting. But surprisingly, the colleagues all took a vote to try to get him to come back. In the summer of 2000, he became an electrician's apprentice, and he was well liked and trusted by his colleagues, who even allowed him to open up a contractor's worksite, but his luck was finally running out. The police had completed their investigation and discovered the 6 aforementioned victims, the only ones that they could confirm, which means it was now time to make the arrest. In the early hours of January the 9th, 2001, the police followed him to work one day and finally apprehended Efren Saldivar. To add on to his ever-changing motive, he now claimed that he killed as some sort of secret revenge on the world that saw him all his life as goody-goody. On March the 12th, 2002, 33-year-old Efren Saldivar pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder and received 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, and he remains at Salinas Valley State Prison in Soledad, California. But the question remains, do you agree with what he did? Was Efren Saldivar really trying to end somebody's pain? Or was this merely an excuse to add to his sick enjoyment in taking another person's life? It will forever remain unclear when his killing spree started and how many were taken. These are all questions left up in the air while we all remain seeking answers.